Hi, I'm Jan Shagdell. Today we're talking about Enneagram instinctual variants, and we're going to talk about the social variant today. So just a brief recap. The instinctual variants are social, self-preservation, and sexual, and all of us have all three, but typically you have one that's dominant or the most well-developed. And part of the theory is that whatever was less emphasized for you growing up is what then became your dominant variant later. So in the case of social variant, maybe growing up you didn't feel as much of an impact or as much of an emphasis on the role of the community in your life and your social connections, and so you develop that later. That also could be true that, for example, let's say you're a 6 on the Enneagram who naturally has a lot of social variant energy. They're very focused on the community and their connections. So even though, let's say you're a 6 growing up in a family that did focus on community concerns, but just not enough to meet your 6-ness, and that could also cause you to develop into a social 6. So that's part of the theory behind that. Just a little blurb there before we get into social variant. So, in our exercise when we talked before, social variants walking into a room typically notice the hierarchy, who's the most popular, who has the most political power here, and as they're going about their business, they're trying to make connections with people and for people. So they're naturally very effective networkers and want to be connected to as many different groups of people as possible, but especially those groups that they see as the most important or the most powerful. So these groups of people, the social variants, tend to have a little more sense or concern about kind of where do I fit in the pecking order. So status, appearance, prestige, connections, do I know the right people I need to know to get to where I need to in my career? Have I made the right networking decisions that are going to be important for me? So a social variant, when combined with your Enneagram type, just means that whatever Enneagram style you are, you're designating that in a social way. For example, a social variant 3 is going to be about achievement, performance, and getting things done effectively, but especially in ways that others will take notice, so that they'll have a sense of personal brand, connectedness, and political capital, as an 8 I know would like to say. Political capital being influence with people. And social variants want to make sure they have a lot of that political capital stored up, so that they are somebody, and that the whole concept of being stronger together, we're stronger as a pack, which is part of the idea of social variant. That's especially true if you are a member of that pack who is absolutely irreplaceable. So social variants will want to focus on that as well, being kind of the strongest, survival of the fittest almost. So I'll give you another example. Let's say another Enneagram style that tends towards social would be Enneagram 7. They tend to see people as resources, as the most important resource that you can have, and so they want to make sure that they're connected to lots of types of different people, and that's certainly a social variant aspect. Whether you're introverted or extroverted, most social variants want to make sure that they are connected to the different groups that they're going to need in one way or another. So what else to say about social variants? So here's an interesting thing that I picked up at the Enneagram conference. I think this was Mario Sikora who said this. If you've never followed his work, he has very interesting work on the subtypes. But he talked about the temperature of the 3 different types. So he talked about self-preservation, people tending to be kind of a warm approach, so somebody that wants to engage with you and relatively friendly. He talked about sexual variance as having more of a hot temperature, just kind of more intense and fiery, and the social variance is having kind of a cool temperature. Because in a sense, if you're having an interaction with a social variant, you're chatting with them, it's not totally about that conversation you're having, it's about the group. So there can sometimes be a sense of the social variant having a 5-minute chat with you and then being ready to move on after that. The social variants typically aren't the ones in the corner all night at a party having a long, in-depth conversation about something. They like to make as many connections as possible. And other examples of social variants or types that tend towards social variants, we talked about 3s, 2s with a 3 wing often can be social variant, 6s, 7s, 9s can be social variant quite often. Types that would be more rare as a social variant, the first one we think of is style 5, not necessarily group think type people wanting to really pay attention to the needs of the community around them. That just doesn't totally jive with 5 as naturally. And the other one that isn't as natural, so it's the rarest of the 3, is the style 8, which I think is a little bit more surprising because 8s at their best really are focused on the health of the community, being someone important in the community that's going to mentor and help the others, help the underdog. So that's a general overview of social variance, and like I said before, whatever your style is the car, and your variant is the driver. So if you're a style 1, you're being driven by the self-preservationist or the social variant or whatever that is. One last thing on social variance. So you can sometimes tell what your variant is by what happens to you when different issues arise in your life. And typically whatever your dominant variant is, that's how your issues will tend to work themselves out. So a social variant, for example, at the more difficult times of their life will have experiences where they're kind of kicked out of a social group that's important to them. So that could be even something like excommunicated from a church or a faith. It could be, not being elected to some kind of office, maybe even student body president when you're a senior in high school or something like that, or just your social group not accepting you. And social variants are very focused on acceptance, and acceptance by the group. The larger group is very important. So that's all about social variance. Feel free to email, Facebook, or comment if there's something I didn't cover that you had a question about, and we'll talk next week about sexual variance. Thanks, and see you then.